Hi guys, welcome back to the third episode of Our Body, the podcast. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking about consent and the importance of consent and what consent doesn't look like. Now, let's start with what consent does look like. By my definitions, consent or a consensual act, sexual act, is when two people involved, or three, or however many people you're deciding to have sex with at once, but when all parties involved have willingly, actively and enthusiastically, which I feel like is the key word, agreed to participate in whatever sexual act you're doing. And you haven't enforced this consent onto them. You haven't influenced their decision in any way. That's what consent would look like. And I think what's important to consider as well is that consent isn't as simple as saying yes or saying no. It's not as clear cut as just saying yes or no, because there are plenty of situations where even if someone has said yes to you, that yes still wasn't consensual because of other factors involved. And so it's important to understand that this is a misconception people will have regarding consent, and that actually there's a lot more that needs to be said than just yes or no. There are physical cues to look out for to show that someone is in distress or is in discomfort with whatever it is that you're doing. So like I said, it's not just as clear cut as saying no or saying yes to someone. Okay, so one way in which consent hasn't been gained is when you pressure someone into saying yes. And this is what I mean by it's not as clear cut as saying yes or no, because sometimes you will say yes, but that yes wasn't consensual because you've been pressured into saying yes. And this could be done through manipulation, through guilt. This could be done by inducing fear into someone. So they then feel too afraid to say no because of the possible consequences they might face if they do. And so they choose to say yes, not because they want to engage in sex or any kind of sexual activity with you, but because they feel they have no other choice. It will almost feel like an obligation to carry on or carry out a sexual act. And the moment it starts to feel like you're obligated to do that, then that wasn't done out of your consent. Now, the second way in which consent hasn't been gained is when you assume someone has given you consent, or you assume someone's own thoughts. Like, you'll often hear abusers say, well, she wanted it. Obviously, also, whenever I say she, I do also mean he. This obviously doesn't just happen to women, but I am just speaking from my perspective, and therefore I'm using pronouns like her and she. But of course, these things apply to men as well. Anyways, just thought I'd get that out there. When they say, well, she wanted it, you can never assume, especially when it comes to sex or sexual activity, you can never assume someone wants to do these things, because the moment you start assuming consent has been given, then once again you've put yourself in a situation where you may have just committed sexual assault or sexual abuse, because you've completely disregarded even gaining that consent or trying to gain that consent. Mostly when people assume that she wanted it, or he wanted it, or they wanted it, it will be because of, or they'll look to survivor was dressed, because there's this assumption that if a woman or a man is showing skin and is dressed somewhat provocatively, then she must want the attention. She must want to be grabbed. She must want to be touched in that way just because she's showing skin. And it's a very misogynistic thought to have, but a lot of people do think this, and it's quite sad that we still live in a generation where these thoughts occur, even though people are too afraid to say it. They still do think this, that if a woman is showing too much skin or is wearing something that's too short or too tight, then she must want the attention. Like, there's no way that she could be wearing this for any other reason. And it's a very restricted thought which leads to destructive situations. No one ever wants it. Like, it's such a stupid phrase to even say, or a stupid thought to even have, because no one in their right frame of mind ever wants to go through sexual trauma, because sexual trauma isn't some personality trait. It's not something you go through to make yourself more interesting. Like, it's a genuine, scary experience that puts you through so many emotional stages. And it's not some kind of, it's not something you wake up and just want to experience for the fun of it. It causes depression, it causes PTSD, it causes anxiety. It can cause long-term trauma and can affect the way people interact with others. It can affect relationships. It affects so much that you can never ever just assume that someone wants that for themselves, because no one does. There's also this assumption that if you've done it in the past, or you've interacted with someone in the past, sexually interacted with someone in the past, that again, you've assumed that she'd want or he'd want to take it that step further. It's not okay to just think that you're entitled to someone's body because they've given you permission to do something in the past. It makes no sense. Whenever sex or sexual activity comes up, consent needs to be given in every single one of those situations. I was mentioning earlier that, if you flirt with someone, or, you've shown interest in someone in some way, that people can use that as an excuse to say, well, you was flirting with me, so why wouldn't you want to have sex with me? Flirting, conversations, kissing, giving head does not always lead to sex. It doesn't always have to end up in sex. And if you're too immature to even think that, then you shouldn't even be having sex in the first place, or you shouldn't even be engaging in any kind of sexual activity in the first place, because if you don't see the line in between each of those acts, and you don't consider the boundaries people have for themselves, then you shouldn't be doing that at all. People can change their mind at any point. I don't care if you're midway through and you're in the moment. If someone tells you to get off them, get off them. It's not, well, why are you trying to ruin the mood, or trying to persuade them? No. If at any point someone says no to you, get off them. And it can even be beyond before sex. It doesn't have to be just during sex. It can literally be at any point. You can leave a conversation, you can leave a room at any given point. The moment you feel uncomfortable or pressured or in pain or just fearful, you can leave. It doesn't have to be just through verbally saying no. There's a lot of physical cues that will show you are in distress or in pain. And if someone chooses to disregard that, then that is a problem within themselves, my dear. The most obvious way in which you haven't gained consent is by using the influence of drugs or alcohol. I mean, when you as an individual have consciously decided to get someone drunk or to get someone high to a point where they can be easily swayed into doing something that you want to do. For example, with the use of drugs, there's obviously, you know, getting your spike drinked. What? Getting your drink spiked. I remember watching a video either on Instagram or Twitter where they were showing how easy it was to put these date rape drugs into a drink without even without anyone even clocking what was going on. And literally in the beginning of the video, that say the cup was here, right? It just seemed like, so there were different situations where the person was like handing the bartender money, or like handing over tissue or something. And in each of those like hand movements, a date rape drug had been put into the drink, and you didn't even, like, you wouldn't even know. There was no like way to tell by the naked eye that your drink was just spiked. And that's you making a very conscious decision, knowing that once a person is intoxicated or high, that, you know, they can be easily persuaded into doing something. And again, like I said, this doesn't include when you're just on a date, or I don't know, if you're out in a club or whatever, or at a party and you're both drinking and you both agree to do something. It's not including that. It's when you're doing it on your own accord, and with purposeful intentions of it leading somewhere you know they wouldn't be comfortable doing if they were sober. I hate that a lot of the conversations around this are based off of saying, oh, well, women, you have to watch your drinks, don't let a man buy you a drink, and there's like those things that you can put to cover your cup. I always see like Instagram ads for it and stuff, but there's like things that you can put on top of your cup so that it covers it whilst you're in a club or something, so no one slips a drug in your drink. And I hate that, because it's like, why are we having these conversations where we're constantly teaching women to avoid sexual assault when really we should be teaching people to not commit sexual assault? I feel like especially with consent, these things need to be implemented into the education systems from a very young age. I think we do so much to avoid having young children and teenagers engage in discussions like this because it's too much of a sensitive topic, when this is literally the harsh reality of life. You know, like, you constantly need to be taught what's right from wrong. And I feel like by the time people have these like educational conversations surrounding sexual assault and trauma, it's almost too late. A lot of the conversations we have now when it comes to trying to educate people around sexual assault is directed to trying to absolve the perpetrators once the crime has already been committed, when really people should just be taught from the get-go what's right from wrong, what consent looks like, what can lead to sexual assault, what kind of behaviours are sexual assault and are sexual abuse, and being able to recognise assault, because I've mentioned this in the last couple of episodes, but a lot of people don't even realise that they've been sexually assaulted, because they just don't know what it looks like. And I think if we even try and educate people from year 7, and have meaningful discussions surrounding this, I think we'd probably live in a world where sexual assault would happen far less, because people will be able to recognise that their actions are wrong. And, you know, that would be living in a very idealistic world, but I do think that education is such a strong key and such a strong factor in being able to properly educate people on consent and sexual assault, because I think now it's almost like a normal thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, people don't really consider consent. People kind of laugh about it in a way, and just treat it as a joke. And it's sad because then you see, stories, like survivors telling their stories on the timeline or whatever on social media, and then you'll have about a week of people saying, oh, we need to make a change, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to educate people, and then it's like after that week's done, then it just goes back to normal. It goes back to avoiding these discussions and avoiding talking about the reality of sexual assault and sexual trauma. It needs to be a constant thing. Like I remember PSHE lessons, I don't even remember talking about consent when it comes to sex. And I think we started those in year 9. And literally like the only thing I remember doing when it came to the sex ed part of PSHE was learning how to put on a condom. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's obviously clearly important, but why do I not remember lessons surrounding sexual assault? Why do I not remember lessons surrounding consent? Like those are, to me, far more important, because those are the situations that can truly get you in a lot of shit, obviously. And I don't remember having those lessons. I don't remember being taught that, because we tiptoe so much around people when it comes to discussing this that people don't know how to discuss it anymore. Like it's become such an uncomfortable conversation for people. Now, the other thing I want to talk about are nudes and sexting and taking videos or taking pictures, because although it's not sex, they're still sexual acts, and you still need to gain consent for all those things. And this is mainly around people who expose or leak someone's nudes, or sneakily try and record whilst you're having sex with someone. So although they're not sort of definitive terms when it comes to abuse or assault, they're still non-consensual acts. And these things are criminal offences because of the reality of revenge porn and how easy it is to leak stuff like this and just get it out in the open. And once things are up on the internet or up on social media, it is so difficult to get things down, because it could be up on Twitter for 1 second and you'll have so many people retweeting it, and then you don't even know who has it anymore. It's equally still a violation to a survivor of sexual assault or sexual trauma, because you still put them in that same position where you've gone ahead and completely disregarded them as an individual. You haven't tried to consider the consequences of your own actions. And I feel like now, especially in this society, like when it comes to nudes and taking videos, it's almost considered not as serious as sexual assault or sexual abuse, because they're not, to the ear, they don't sound as invasive, or they don't sound as, it's not like it's not sexual penetration, if that makes sense, but it's still that same level of violation, because you're doing things with their body, not their physical body, but images of their body or videos of their body or conversations surrounding their body, and taking it beyond the two of you. And what people need to remember is that consent isn't just for when you two are actually having sex or engaging in sexual acts. It's in every kind of sexual act, and that goes to the extent of nudes and making videos. And you can never pick and choose when you want to be careful about gaining consent. So you can't be so adamant or be really careful when it comes to consent for sex, and then be careless with what you do with someone's nudes. Or, if you're trying to sneak a recording knowing that you haven't asked the other person you're having sex with, knowing that the other person can't see that you're holding onto your phone and recording them. And the moment you start sneakily doing these things, you're conscious then of the fact that what you're doing is wrong, because if you were so comfortable in doing it, you wouldn't have to be so sneaky about it. You wouldn't have to get someone else's phone and take a picture of it from that phone so they don't see you screenshotted their nudes, but you're still sneaking around the basic guidelines of consent and respect and committing a non-consensual act. And also the other thing is as well, delete nudes off your phone. If you're not speaking to someone anymore or fucking with that person anymore, or you've broken up with that person, delete nudes, delete videos, delete conversations you've had with that person in regards to their body, because those things are personal. And if you're not engaging with that person anymore in such a personal way, why would you still want to have their nudes on your phone? And if you're that desperate to see a naked body, there's Pornhub, there's all these porn sites that you can go on. You don't have to sneak around and keep an image or a video or conversations of someone's body that you don't even speak to anymore. As in, you don't even say hi or ask them how they are, and yet you still have a video of their body on your phone. I think it's weird. I think everyone should find it strange. So if you're watching this right now and you have a nude of someone you don't even speak to anymore, please delete it. Stop being weird. Because again, like, it might just be on your phone. You might not have the intention to leak it or whatever, but the fact that it's even there is already an issue, because, like I said, you're not speaking to that person anymore. Our bodies are very personal, and I feel like once you go beyond that stage, or once you've moved on from that stage, you need to respect that as well. Even more so, because you need to be able to trust that person to not leak your nudes. You need to be able to trust that that person has actually deleted your nudes if you've asked them to delete your nudes. Like, it's just as personal as actual sex and actual sexual acts. And there shouldn't be a lack of consideration when it comes to consent surrounding nudes and things like that. And again, like I said, if you're already sneaking around doing these things, like sneakily recording, you know what you're doing is wrong. So don't do it. But yeah, that is all I have for this video. I hope that I've raised conversation starters, discussion points for people to have. And like I said, this podcast isn't just for survivors of sexual assault. It's also for those who want to support survivors of sexual assault. It's also for people who are just curious and want to educate themselves around sexual trauma, because I think we try and tiptoe so carefully around these conversations that people just don't have them, because they think that people will be too uncomfortable to discuss this. And of course it's uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable situation to even be in, let alone discuss. But that doesn't mean you avoid that, because the minute you start avoiding uncomfortable conversations, you are somewhat encouraging it to carry on, because people will then know that even if they do certain things, no one's going to speak up about it because it's too uncomfortable. When in reality, I think the uncomfortable topics are the ones that need to be discussed the most. And I think it comes from a place of fearing your own intentions and fearing your own capability, or fearing that you have actually done something that was non-consensual, and having all these other realizations. But that's why it's so important, because sometimes people can't distinguish right from wrong, and they need to be taught what's right from wrong, and it needs to be a constant lesson. It's not something you sit for 3 hours and read a handbook about. Like, it's something that you constantly need to go through, because you're constantly going to be presented with different situations and different scenarios that you haven't been in before, and you need to know what would be the right thing to do, what would be the morally responsible thing to do in a lot of these situations. But yeah, I'm gonna stop talking. Yeah, please do subscribe and obviously share this around as well. And I will see you all in the next episode. Bye.